Her shift at Bexar County Hospital was dubbed the death shift back in the early 1980s. Janine Jones was accused of giving deadly injections to more than a dozen babies.
November 21st, 1982, Janine Jones, known as the Angel of Death, was arrested for the death of two infants. As investigations continued, it was discovered that Janine was a lot worse than anyone could have ever imagined. These are the world's most dangerous women held in captivity.
Rita Camilleri stabbed more than 200 times in a fit of rage by her daughter, who feared being taken away.
In the frustration, I didn't know what I was doing. I can't.
July 2019, 27-year-old Jessica Camilleri committed a crime so gruesome that even in prison she's considered a danger to other vicious inmates. Rita Camilleri was a devoted mother who lived in St. Clair, a suburb in Western Sydney, Australia, known for her loving and caring nature. Rita's life revolved around providing support and care for her daughter Jessica, who faced severe mental health challenges. Jessica Camilleri struggled with autism spectrum disorder and intermittent explosive disorder, which often led to violent outbursts and aggressive behavior. Despite the challenges posed by these conditions, Jessica resisted treatment as she realized her diagnoses could be leveraged for attention. Rita, wanting to keep her daughter happy and maintain peace, agreed to this, a decision that would later cost her everything.
And I had my mum's head in my hand. I know this sounds insane, but I was taking it for evidence to show the neighbour. In the struggle, in the frustration, I didn't know what I was doing. I couldn't stop.
July 20th, 2019, Rita dialed 000, the Australian emergency number. Jessica, in a fit of rage, attacked her mother and stabbed her over 200 times, but she didn't stop there. She then went to cut off various parts of her body before finally decapitating her. It was a brutal scene, worse than any horror movie would dare to portray. Interestingly, Jessica's favorite movie was Saw, and some believe that Jessica killed her mom just to act out her horror fantasies. And what's even more shocking is the fact that Jessica showed no remorse for what she did. After chopping off her mom's head, she proceeded to knock on her neighbor's door, proudly holding her mom's head in one hand and a phone in the other. You see, when the operator on the other end of that emergency call asked where she lived, Jessica responded that she would have to take the phone to a neighbor. The neighbors, who had initially come out to help after hearing the violent argument, were shocked and terrified. When a neighbor gave the dispatcher their address, police soon arrived. They would retrieve her head 2 houses down along the road and later find the rest of her body in the kitchen. Then Jessica asked the most unexpected question. She asked if they could stitch back her mom's head. Throughout that whole call, she tried to paint herself as the victim, complaining that her fingers were broken. Jessica also claimed it was her mom who attacked first, but this was a blatant lie, as she later admitted to a forensic psychologist that she was hacking like a butcher thanks to her horror movie fantasies. You see, the fact was Jessica pulled her mom by the hair into the kitchen, where she then proceeded to use 7 different knives to butcher her own mother.
As the jury clearly did, that the offender is substantially impaired as a consequence of her multiple disorders, and she experiences episodes of violent rage which she is unable to control.
March 2021, Jessica Camilleri was found guilty of manslaughter. She was then sentenced to 21 years and 7 months in prison, with a non-parole period of 16 years and 2 months. She'd be a troublemaker even behind bars. 2023, her sentence had been extended by 22 months for assaulting 2 prison officers by ripping their hair out. According to the prison guards here, she had a pattern of attacking females by grabbing their hair, a behavior that continued well after her mother's brutal murder. This means that she'll now be eligible for parole in July 2032. 2008, Melissa Oeda, better known as La China, was promoted to lead a special unit of the Sinaloa Hit Squad. However, La China was soon replaced by the cartel, and she didn't take that development lightly. The Mexican cartels are known for their extreme violence and ruthless operations, which would often leave a trail of bloodshed and terror in their wake. Amidst this brutality, La China emerged as one of the most feared and merciless figures, seamlessly fitting into the worst of the worst. Melissa Margarita Calderon Oeda was drawn into the dark world of cartel violence at a young age. Her induction into the Sinaloa cartel was orchestrated by her first love, Eric Davalos von Borstel, a seasoned criminal who saw potential in Melissa and introduced her to the life of a sicario. This relationship was pivotal, as it not only marked the beginning of her criminal career, but also set her on a path of ruthless ambition. La China's rise within the cartel was swift and brutal, under the mentorship of Damaso Lopez Nunez, aka El Licenciado, a legend in the cartel world. In fact, without him, El Chapo would have never achieved as much as he did. With his help, she honed her skills and quickly became known for her efficiency and heartlessness. El Licenciado was the man who famously aided El Chapo's escape when he worked as an official at the prison where El Chapo was locked up. He recognized Melissa's potential and placed her in charge of Las Fuerzas Especiales de los Damaso, a feared group of assassins. Under her command, La China had 50 special assassins. The position of power allowed her to command respect and instill fear amongst her peers. Under her command, the murder rate in Baja California Sur tripled, turning the region into a war zone. Her brutality knew no bounds. La China was responsible for over 150 murders, each more gruesome than the last. She was known for her meticulous planning and ruthless execution, often involving torture and dismemberment, sending a clear message to her enemies. She was all about asserting dominance and control over her territory. Now, one specific harrowing incident involved her logistics chief, El Tyson. When he objected to killing this couple and stealing their truck, she would cut off his forearms before killing him, just demonstrating she'll take out anyone who stands in her way. Even those that worked with her weren't safe. June 2015, the cartel's leadership decided to forcibly replace La China with Abel Naum Quintero Manares, better known as El Grande. Don't ask us why. And this was when the cartel made a big mistake. The power struggle between La China and El Grande was brutal and bloody. After being ordered to step down and hand over her command to El Grande, a recently released cartel heavyweight, La China was filled with rage and defiance, compounded by the fact that El Grande had murdered her first love, Eric Davalos van Borstel. Refusing to bow down to El Grande, La China took a different path. She formed her own faction, taking her new boyfriend, Hector Pedro Camarena Gomez, or El Chino, as her second-in-command. Together they assembled a formidable force of 300 sicarios and a network of drug dealers, asserting their dominance over La Paz and Cabo San Lucas. These rogues quickly became notorious for their ruthlessness and wave of violence that they would unleash. La China's defiance and the creation of her own gang marked her as a rogue assassin, feared by both rivals and former allies. As a result, the internal war within the cartel would escalate, with bodies piling up as La China and her gang fought to maintain control. After years of evading the authorities and ruling her faction with an iron fist, La China's downfall came from the person she trusted most, her then boyfriend and second-in-command El Chino. El Chino, once her loyal partner in crime, was captured by authorities. He was facing a long prison sentence, so he chose to betray La China in exchange for leniency. His cooperation was a devastating blow to her operations. He showed off all the locations and secret burial sites where La China had disposed her victims and provided detailed information about her network and movements. On September 20th, 2015, La China was at the Cabo San Lucas airport, preparing to board a plane to Sinaloa. And unbeknownst to her, El Chino had tipped off the authorities about her travel plans. She didn't stand a chance. Immediately, she was surrounded and arrested without a single shot being fired. The arrest was a significant victory for law enforcement, marking the end of a reign of terror that left bloodshed and fear across La Paz and Cabo San Lucas. La China, once a powerful and feared cartel leader, is now a feared prisoner in Federal Social Readaptation Center No. 1. Rebecca Butterfield murdered her cellmate, Blue Slim Ward, by stabbing her 33 times. Now, what people didn't know was that she was just getting started. Rebecca Butterfield's early years were marred by trauma and abuse. Born into a real dysfunctional family, she endured physical and abuse that really left her deep psychological scars. Her disturbing childhood would sow the seeds of her violent tendencies, which would later manifest into horrifying ways. Butterfield had been a major headache for police ever since she was 21. Within a span of 9 years, Butterfield had 39 corrective services alerts to her name. Her criminal career began with petty theft and assault, but it quickly escalated. She was a social menace and would harm anyone who got too close to her. And if she couldn't find anyone, well, she just turns on herself, often inflicting serious injuries on her own body. In November 2000, Butterfield was imprisoned for stabbing her neighbor. That was because her neighbor attempted to stop Butterfield from harming herself. But instead of de-escalating, it just took a violent turn, resulting in the neighbor being stabbed by Butterfield. In 2003, while serving her sentence for that, Butterfield stabbed another person, but this time it'd be fatal. The victim was her cellmate, Luz Lim Ward. Lim Ward was a Filipino woman who was nearing the end of her sentence. She had befriended Butterfield, but was unaware of that deadly obsession she had with hurting people. So this seemingly benign friendship would take a tragic turn when Lim Ward became a target of Butterfield's violent impulses, culminating in a frenzied attack in which Lim Ward was stabbed 33 times. Nobody had any idea why this happened, but one thing's for sure. Butterfield stood over Lim Ward and watched gleefully as she bled to death. Well, that was a shock to the prison community, marking Butterfield as a very dangerous and unpredictable inmate. According to reports, Butterfield's time in prison was characterized by extreme violence and self-mutilation. She was notorious for her self-harm, often slicing her neck and bashing her head against the walls. It got so crazy that this one time she bashed her head on the wall about 105 times, which led to some serious injuries. Her violent outbursts weren't limited to herself. She frequently attacked guards, nurses, and fellow inmates, but one of the most chilling incidents involved her throwing hot tea at the guards and lunging at the officers while wearing ankle bracelets. It's a little scary to see how cunning she actually was. It was almost like a game for her. She would cleverly trick the prison guards into getting into her cell and then proceed to attack them. As much as staff would try to prevent these dangerous encounters, Butterfield always seemed to outsmart them and make them fall into her trap. Well, they soon realized they're dealing with a psychotic woman with some big issues, so this would bring on a full psychological evaluation for Butterfield. It was at this point that we found out she had multiple personality disorder and schizophrenia. So now it was clear that her mental health problem was a significant factor for her violent behavior. Her actions were often driven by the voices in her head, which she claimed urged her to commit acts of violence. But despite years of medication and therapy, her condition showed little improvement, and she remained a constant threat to those around her. In January 2021, New South Wales Supreme Court Justice Robert Allen Holm extended Butterfield's incarceration by 3 years, even though her jail sentence for jailhouse homicide of Lim Ward had expired in November 2015. Guys, Butterfield is the first woman in Australia to be kept locked up indefinitely under a continuing detention order, which is only used for the most dangerous criminals. And it would be her violent episodes convincing authorities that, yeah, she can never be released.
Death row inmate Antoinette Frank. The former New Orleans police officer is the only woman on death row.
November 25th, 1994. Antoinette Frank met Rogers Lacaze, a known drug dealer, who had just been shot. Little did she know that her meeting with Lacaze would kick off her journey into a dangerous life of crime. February 7th, 1993. Antoinette joined the New Orleans Police Department at a time when the force was grappling with severe understaffing and low morale. Despite failing 2 psychiatric evaluations, though, and being caught lying on her application, Frank was hired due to the department's desperate need for officers. But that turned out to be a huge mistake. I mean, who could have guessed that Antoinette Frank, who was often described as shy and indecisive by her colleagues, would turn out to be a vicious killer? On November 25th, 1994, Frank's life would take a sinister turn when she crossed paths with Lacaze. Now, this relationship began with Frank trying to reform Lacaze, but that spiraled into a partnership of crime. On March 4th, 1995, the two lovebirds collaborated to carry out this armed robbery at the Kim An restaurant, a Vietnamese eatery where Frank and her fellow officer, Ronald A. Williams, patrolled as security guards. Frank and Lacaze would storm the restaurant and start shooting blindly at the people inside. In a matter of minutes, they shot Officer Williams and the 2 children of the restaurant's owners. Ha and Kwang. Turns out the robbery was initially successful, but Antoinette made a huge mistake. In a twisted attempt to cover her tracks, and because of being paranoid, she might have left some evidence back at that restaurant, so she returned later, pretending to be just an officer on duty. However, her whole game was quickly discovered when survivors, who had hidden in a cooler during the attack, identified her as the shooter, and so the trial of Antoinette Frank was a media sensation, as the nation froze in shock that a police officer carried out such heinous acts. She was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Meanwhile, her accomplice, Rogers Lacaze, received a life sentence. October 2023, Frank applied for clemency but was denied, and she remains on death row. This was because the family of the cop who was killed in that robbery strongly objected to that. On the other hand, while supporters highlighted Frank's troubled childhood, a board member on the state pardon team, Alvin Roche Jr., voted against clemency due to Frank's prison record and the possibility of her eventual parole release.
Her shift at Bexar County Hospital was dubbed the death shift back in the early 1980s. Janine Jones was accused of giving deadly injections to more than a dozen babies.
On March 17, 1982, Janine Jones was sacked from Bexar County Hospital after she was discovered to be responsible for the death of pediatric patients under her care. Unfortunately, this only gave her more freedom to murder more patients. In the late 70s, Janine Jones had become a nurse, but her mission wasn't to save lives. She instead wanted to kill people, making her one of the most horrible women who ever existed. And while there's not a lot of detail about Jones's early life, here's what we do know. She grew up in Texas, where she was adopted by this nightclub owner and his wife. Now, from the outside, her life was pretty normal. She worked briefly as this beautician before she pursued nursing. However, there was this dark side of her. A troubling fascination with control and power began to brew. October 30th, 1978, Jones began her nursing career at Bexar County Hospital, now University Hospital of San Antonio, Texas. It was here, in the Pediatric Intensive Care Unit, that an alarming amount of patients began to die under her care. In fact, so many people were dying here that they dubbed her shift the death shift. But later it became obvious that something sinister was going on here. You see, the hospital had never seen this many deaths before. So by March 17, 1982, the hospital, fearing litigation, chose to quietly dismiss her, rather than actually investigating and having her pay for her crimes. So to add to the cover-up, the hospital would ask all of its other licensed vocational nurses to resign and had staffed the pediatric ICU exclusively with registered nurses. The decision would prove fatal for many more innocent lives. However, before she left the Bexar County Hospital, a secret report by the hospital's board was made that implicated her in the mysterious deaths of 10 children. The babies, along with 7 others who survived unexplainable emergencies, had seemed to stop breathing, would bleed from old puncture marks, or had suffered seizures while in Jones's care. Janine Jones would move to a pediatric clinic in Kerrville, Texas, where she would continue her reign of terror. Now she had access to powerful drugs like digoxin, heparin, and succinylcholine. When you administer these drugs inappropriately, you could induce a medical crisis, leading to some cardiac arrests and even death. Jones used these substances to create emergencies and then position herself as a savior when she miraculously intervened. She would have continued to kill if the doctor at Kerrville Clinic wasn't sharp enough to discover some puncture marks in the bottle of succinylcholine. Now, this drug, used as a paralytic, was found diluted with saline. Jones's explanation that she was trying to stimulate the creation of a pediatric ICU in Kerrville was met with skepticism. In addition to that, prosecutors claimed that Jones loved the thrill and ego boost of reviving sick children that she would inject with life-threatening drugs to test her nursing skills. So if there was a pediatric ICU in place, she felt there would be better chances of reviving her patients. However, the evidence was damning, and she was charged with poisoning 6 pediatric patients. 1984, Jones is convicted of murder and injury to a child. She was given 99 years in prison for the murder of Chelsea McClellan. The trial revealed the horrifying extent of her actions, with estimates suggesting that she may have been responsible for the deaths of up to 60 pediatric patients.
Where Janine was leaving the room, stopped at the door, turned around, and said, I just want to get this on the record. I really did kill those bastards.
Despite her conviction, the fight for justice was far from over. Texas mandatory release law, aimed at reducing prison overcrowding, meant Jones could be released as early as 2018. The prospect horrified the families of her victims and the public, but in a bid to prevent her release, prosecutors filed new charges in 2017, leading to additional convictions.
Charges, that's what we're being told. Do you have anything to say about the 5 charges? Anything to say to the families?
Now she won't be eligible until 2037, when she'll be 87 years old.
Catherine Knight might have been the most evil woman to ever walk the planet.
1995, Catherine Knight moves into the house of John Price as his lover. Although Price knew she was dangerous, he didn't know he was dealing with evil in its purest form. You see, Catherine Knight had been in many relationships before she ended up with John Price. All the men in her life had run away when they discovered that they were dealing with a woman who was more of a monster than a human. Now, as a teenager, Knight would work as a butcher and develop some professional skills in the art of cutting flesh. Although she took that wonderful skill and enjoyed slashing and stabbing people with it. 1973, Knight met her first husband, David Kellett, when she was 16 years old, and shortly after they got married, Knight's behavior became erratic and possessive. She would fly into fits of rage, often for no apparent reason, which sounds like most women, but she was actually physical with him. He endured punchings, kickings, and even bites, as she seemed to find pleasure in inflicting pain. In fact, on one occasion, she stabbed him in the chest, but miraculously missed his heart. Kellett tried running away from Knight multiple times, but she always tracked him down, sometimes even breaking into his workplace to continue the abuse. Her obsession knew no bounds, and she'd often make threats saying that she'd kill him, and then herself if he ever left. During their relationship, she gave birth to 2 children, but this would do nothing to curb her violent tendencies. Sometimes she would take her anger out on her own kids, leaving Kellett fearful for their safety. May 1976, shortly after the birth of their first child, Melissa Ann, Kellett left Knight for another woman because he was done with the abuse. When Knight found out, she took her daughter and placed her on the train tracks, hoping the train would crush her. Then she walks up into town, violently swinging an axe at anyone who would cross her path. Thank God Melissa Ann was rescued by a homeless man who was walking around the railway line just minutes before the train passed. So it was around this time that Knight was admitted to St. Elmo's Hospital, where she was later diagnosed with postnatal depression and had spent several weeks in recovery. Later, she was brought to Morrisett Psychiatric Hospital after she attacked a woman with a knife shortly after leaving St. Elmo's. After hearing of this incident, her ex-husband Kellett decided to come back to support her. But despite his support, Knight had a long way to being mentally stable. She had this disturbing habit of violently attacking men she was in relationships with, often using frying pans, like this one time when she smashed Kellett's head so hard that his skull got severely fractured, causing him to just pass out and collapse on a neighbor's porch. So after that failed marriage, Knight would move on to another man by the name of David Saunders. And to show him how dangerous she could be if he ever had an affair, Knight slit the neck of his puppy in front of him. Her behavior was so scary that David took leave from work so he could hide from her. But despite this disturbing behavior, somehow Knight managed to find another victim in John Price. You see, at first, Knight appeared all loving and attentive, but then her true nature came out, and Price, like the previous victims, found himself trapped, struggling to break free from her clutches. Knight's behavior escalated, and she began making threats, which sometimes included stabbing him, saying that she would kill Price and his family if he ever left her.
It could have been a fork, a spoon, or anything in my hand. It was a knife that cut your meal with, and I aimed it at him, and it got him. He was leaning closer than what I thought.
On February 29, 2000, John Price had returned home from work and followed his usual routine of checking in with the neighbors before going to bed at 11 p.m. Knight came home shortly after and woke Price before they both went back to bed. In a fit of unexplainable rage, Knight stabbed Price repeatedly 37 times while he was sleeping with a knife, both in the front and back of his body, with many of these wounds extending into vital organs. That attack was swift and brutal, and Price really had no chance to defend himself. According to reports, he woke up during that attack, but just couldn't fight her off. He tries to escape, but she chases him throughout the house. Although Jones managed to open that front door and get outside, he couldn't run far enough due to his wounds and just stumbled back into the hallway, where he finally just bled out. But the horror had only just begun. What she did next proved she had carefully planned to kill Price. A few days before she carried out this act, remember, she was a butcher, so she knew that she had to hold his body in place for what she was planning to do. And the time came to take out her brand new set of knives. So after ensuring Price was dead, she dragged the body downstairs and began to skin and gut him, using the skills she'd learned working in an abattoir. She then hung Price's skin up to dry in her bedroom like a trophy, and then she took the rest of his remains and prepared a meal for his own children to eat for lunch. Meanwhile, one of Price's colleagues had come over to check on him because he didn't show up at work. When he tried knocking on Price's bedroom window to wake him up, he noticed some blood on the front door and immediately called the police. The authorities would arrive at a gruesome scene of Price's body with Knight comatose from taking a large number of pills. And thank God the kids didn't eat that meal. After her arrest, investigations revealed the full extent of Knight's madness.
I can't remember anything.
Do you recall yourself going to bed?
Faintly.
Would you expect to see remorse or any sign of guilt from this person? She looked like she was proud of what she was doing. Knight was given life imprisonment. The judge also ordered that her papers were to be marked "definitely never to be released," making her the first female inmate to be labeled as such in Australia's history. January 26, 1992, Celeste Simone Carrington killed her first victim. But it wouldn't be enough for her. She would go on a killing spree, earning herself a reputation as a cold-hearted killer with no drop of empathy in her. Born 1961, Celeste Carrington's early life was anything but vibrant. Raised in abject poverty, she endured unimaginable abuse at the hands of her parents. And by the age of 14, she was impregnated by her own father, a trauma that would shape her future in ways no one could imagine. Now, despite her tumultuous upbringing, Celeste attended a community college in Southern California, excelling in track and field, and even competing internationally in shot put. However, beneath the facade of regular life was a dangerous murderer. And after she left athleticism for unknown reasons, Carrington would spend the next few years working menial jobs and moving around often. Surprisingly, when considering her upbringing, Carrington stayed out of trouble and went on to work for a janitorial company that serviced office buildings in California. In December 1991, Celeste was fired from her job as a janitor for stealing checks. She had been trying to financially support her lover and his 3 children, but was no longer able to do so. It'd be from this point that her life takes a dark turn. January 17, 1992, Carrington breaks into a Dodge car dealership in Redwood City, California. She had worked in this building and knew that the back entrance was often left unlocked. She wore some gloves and used a crowbar to force open the doors. And here, she would steal a .357 Magnum revolver and 5 bullets. Barely 1 month later, the first heinous act unfolded. Victor Esparza, a 34-year-old janitor at a shoe factory, was found dead at his place of work in San Carlos, California, after Celeste tried to rob him. He died from a gunshot wound with a .357 Magnum revolver, and according to reports, Victor was either kneeling or standing and showed no signs of resistance. Celeste was, however, not identified as the killer because there was no evidence connecting her to that shooting. March 11, 1992, less than 2 months after her first murder, Celeste struck again. This time, her victim was Carolyn Gleason, a 36-year-old property manager at a real estate office in Palo Alto, California. And just like Esparza, Gleason was also found on her knees, seemingly pleading for her life, before Celeste coldly pulled the trigger while she was in her office. The nature of these killings suggests a calculated mind, one that thrived on the sense of power and control. 5 days after killing Gleason, Celeste targeted Alan Marks, a pediatrician in Redwood City, California, at his clinic. Luckily, Marks survived that attack, despite being shot 3 times. His testimony would later be crucial in piecing together the puzzle of Celeste's rampage. When police took his statement after he was attacked, he described her as calm and collected, but a predator showing no remorse. March 20th, 1992, Celeste's reign of terror finally came to an end when she was arrested after police from Los Altos, Redwood City, and Palo Alto arrived with a search warrant at her apartment for her connection to 2 burglaries. The evidence against her was overwhelming, which then tied her to the murders. She'd used stolen keys from her previous job as a janitor to access the crime scenes. When authorities searched her apartment, they discovered damning evidence linking her directly to the murders. Police found the .357 handgun in her home. They also found evidence from every crime scene, which included keys to the Dodge car dealership where she had stolen the gun used to kill Esperanza and Gleason. But that's not all. Detectives also found Gleason's purse and pager, her petty cash box, and the key to the real estate building where she was murdered. The drug packets from Dr. Mark's office were also recovered. So despite her claims that she was coerced by her lover to commit these crimes, the jury remained unconvinced by her defense. And in November 1994, Celeste Carrington was sentenced to death and was incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility. As of July 28, 2009, Carrington is one of only 15 women on death row, among a total of 683 death row prisoners in California.